If you think faking a medical emergency or wearing a prisoner costume will get you out of jury duty, you're about to see why that's a one-way ticket to a jail cell. We've tracked down 49 of the most insane attempts to skip court that backfired instantly, from a man who legally changed his name to Jesus Christ just to avoid judgment, to a guy who got sentenced to 10 days behind bars just for hitting the snooze button. These judges were absolutely livid, and the consequences were brutal. So hit that subscribe button and buckle up because part 2 starts right now. 1. A Vermont man decided that the best way to dodge his civic duty was to dress for the job he clearly did not want. He walked into the solemn courthouse wearing an old-fashioned black and white striped prisoner costume complete with a matching cap. The entire room fell silent as he marched toward the jury box looking like a cartoon villain. He loudly announced that he belonged behind bars rather than judging others. The unamused judge stared at him over her spectacles with a look of pure disbelief. Security guards chuckled quietly while the man realized his costume party antic was failing. The judge simply ordered him to sit down and behave immediately. 2. An incredibly bold man stood before a crowded courtroom to present a medical excuse that nobody had ever heard before. He told the stern judge that sitting in a chair for long periods was physically impossible for him. Everyone leaned in expecting to hear about a bad back or a knee injury. The man then explained with a straight face that sitting aggravated his severe sexual frustration. The entire jury pool gasped, while the court reporter stopped typing in horror. The judge rubbed his temples and looked down at the man with exhausted disappointment. It was a humiliating attempt that left the room trying not to laugh. 3. A woman walked into the courtroom radiating an unsettling amount of confidence that confused the lawyers immediately. She did not bring a doctor's note or a travel itinerary to get out of service. Instead, she looked the judge dead in the eye and claimed she did not need to see any evidence. She explained that her psychic powers allowed her to see a pitch-black aura surrounding the confused defendant. The entire room went silent, as she insisted she already knew he was guilty just by looking at his spirit. The judge rubbed his forehead while the defense attorney frantically scribbled notes about this absolute madness. It was the most supernatural attempt to escape responsibility ever seen. 4. One woman thought she had pulled off the perfect acting performance to escape her civic duties forever. She put on a convincing show of having severe PTSD in front of the sympathetic court officials. The judge excused her and she practically skipped out of the building, feeling like a genius. However, she immediately drove to a local radio station to brag about her deception on a live broadcast. She laughed loudly about fooling the court without realizing who was listening in his chambers. The judge happened to be a loyal listener of that exact show. He summoned her back instantly for a very awkward conversation. 5. A young man destroyed a serious criminal trial just because he could not resist updating his social media status. He sat in the jury box while the lawyers were carefully selecting the final panel members. He pulled out his phone and checked into the courthouse on Facebook with a caption that read, "About to find this guy guilty, LOL." He thought he was being funny, but the defense attorney was scrolling through his feed at that exact moment. The lawyer leaped up and showed the post to the judge immediately. The judge was furious and the man was escorted out while the entire room glared. 6. An Alabama woman went to extreme lengths to avoid sitting in a jury box for a few days. She filed legal paperwork to officially change her name to Jesus Christ before her summons date arrived. When the clerk called her new holy name, she stood up and made a stunning proclamation. She told the stunned courtroom that she could not judge the defendant because only God can judge people. The logic was technically sound, but the execution was absolutely bizarre to witness. The judge stared at her with a mix of confusion and annoyance. She was eventually dismissed because nobody wanted to argue with a deity. 7. A prospective juror ruined the impartiality of the entire selection process within seconds of entering the courtroom. She took one look at the nervous defendant sitting at the table and gasped loudly. She pointed an accusing finger at him and shouted that he looked exactly like her ex-boyfriend. She told the judge that because of this resemblance, the man was definitely guilty of something. The defense attorney looked like he was about to have a heart attack right there. The judge quickly realized that this woman had too much emotional baggage to be fair. She was sent home while the defendant looked totally bewildered. 8. A 21-year-old named DeAndre made a mistake that turned a simple morning into a nightmare. He was selected for a jury but made the fatal error of oversleeping on the first day of the trial. He probably thought he would just get a stern lecture or a small fine for missing his alarm. Instead, the furious judge decided to make a massive example out of him for wasting the court's time. The judge sentenced the shocked young man to 10 days in jail immediately. His casual nap turned into a literal prison sentence, while his family watched in total disbelief. 9. A cartoonist named John arrived at jury duty with an excuse that sounded like a dark comedy sketch. The judge asked if anyone had a reason they could not serve impartially in the upcoming trial. John stood up and calmly announced that he was high school friends with the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. The courtroom went so quiet you could hear a pin drop on the floor. He explained that knowing a monster personally made it hard to look at criminal cases normally. The judge realized he was telling the absolute truth. He was excused immediately because nobody wanted to unpack that trauma. 10. A woman decided to turn the serious atmosphere of a federal courthouse into a science fiction convention. She arrived wearing the full white robes and iconic hair buns of Princess Leia from Star Wars. When the clerk asked for her name, she refused to answer to anything other than General Organa. She sat there looking ready to lead a rebellion while the other jurors tried hard not to stare. The judge asked her if she could take the proceedings seriously despite her galactic attire. She remained in character the entire time until they finally let her go. It was a victory for the resistance. 11. A man walked into the courtroom looking incredibly sweaty and uncomfortable, which immediately caught the judge's attention. He raised his hand and requested to be excused due to a severe gastrointestinal emergency involving a gas station burrito. The judge was skeptical at first and asked if he could power through the selection process. The man vividly described exactly what would happen to the nice court chair if he was not released immediately. The description was so graphic and horrifying that the disgusted judge waved him away instantly without asking for more details. The bailiff looked incredibly relieved that he did not have to clean up the potential biological disaster. 12. One potential juror decided to use a science fiction plot to escape the boredom of a long trial. He stood up with a straight face and told the confused judge that he was actually a time traveler. He claimed he had already lived through this specific week in the future and knew the final verdict. He argued that sitting through the trial again would be a complete waste of his precious timeline. The entire courtroom looked at him like he was absolutely crazy while he maintained his character. The judge did not believe him but dismissed him anyway just to avoid the headache of dealing with a lunatic. 13. A school teacher tried to be clever by forging a jury summons to get extra vacation days from her job. She submitted the official-looking document to her school administration, hoping for a nice week off. However, she made a humiliating spelling error that exposed her entire criminal scheme immediately. She spelled the word court as C-O-R-T on the fake document she created herself. The school administrator noticed the typo and called the authorities to verify the summons. The police arrested her for forgery instead of her enjoying a relaxing holiday. She lost her job and faced criminal charges just because she forgot to use spell check on her computer. 14. A man treated a serious criminal trial like a fun tourist attraction for his social media followers. He sat in the jury box and pulled out his smartphone while the defendant was sitting right behind him. He tried to angle his phone perfectly to take a selfie with the accused criminal in the background. The flash went off and the shutter sound echoed loudly through the silent courtroom. The judge was absolutely furious and ordered the bailiff to confiscate the phone immediately to protect the defendant's privacy. He was kicked out of the jury pool and nearly faced charges for his complete lack of respect for the court. 15. A man refused to take his seat in the jury box because of a bizarre conspiracy theory he believed. He pointed at the American flag standing in the corner of the courtroom and started shouting. He claimed that because the flag had a gold fringe on the edges, he was under maritime law. He insisted that the court had no jurisdiction over him unless they were currently on a boat. The judge stared at him in total silence while he rambled about naval treaties and admiralty jurisdiction. He was eventually removed by security, who did not care about the gold fringe on the flag or his legal theories. 16. An elderly woman saw the jury selection process as a perfect opportunity to fix her daughter's love life. Instead of answering questions about her bias, she asked the judge if the defendant was currently single. She announced to the horrified room that she wanted to set him up on a date with her daughter. The defense attorney looked at his client in shock, while the prosecutor tried to suppress a laugh. The judge quickly realized this woman could not be impartial if she wanted the accused as a son-in-law. She was dismissed before she could exchange phone numbers or show the defendant pictures of her daughter. 17. A man was so desperate to make his afternoon golf game that he proposed a gambling solution. He looked at the judge and asked if they could just flip a coin to decide the verdict. He explained that he had a tea time scheduled for 3 o'clock and the trial was taking too long. The suggestion that a person's freedom should depend on a quarter was incredibly offensive. The judge scolded him severely for making a mockery of the justice system in front of everyone. He was kicked out of the courthouse but probably missed his golf game anyway due to the long lecture he received. 18. A man tried to use a terrible strategy to get disqualified by claiming he was extremely racist. He thought the judge would just whisper "okay" and let him leave without any further questions. Instead, the judge made him stand up and explain exactly why to the diverse room of people. The man froze completely because he was lying and could not come up with a reason. He crumbled under the pressure and stuttered while the entire room judged his character. The judge exposed his bluff perfectly and humiliated him in front of everyone before kicking him out. He learned that day that fake bigotry is not a way out. 19. A woman tried to turn the jury box into her own personal dining room during a trial. Security guards noticed something strange about her designer purse as she went through the metal detector. They opened her bag and discovered a whole hot rotisserie chicken from Costco inside. She honestly thought she could snack on a greasy bird while listening to legal arguments. The smell of roasted poultry would have definitely distracted everyone in the solemn courtroom. The judge was informed and she was sent home to eat her dinner in private. It was the most delicious contraband ever confiscated. She apparently did not understand that a court is not a picnic area. 20. A woman walked into a courtroom that was covered floor to ceiling in traditional dark wood paneling. She immediately started hyperventilating and told the judge she had a debilitating phobia of the color brown. She claimed she could not function in the environment because the walls were terrifying her. The judge looked around at the wooden furniture and realized there was no way to accommodate her. It was a very convenient phobia considering almost every courtroom in America looks exactly the same. She was excused because she looked like she was about to faint from the decor. It was either a brilliant lie or the worst luck. 21. A middle-aged woman walked into the jury deliberation room carrying a mysterious flat box under her arm. She waited until the door was locked and then pulled out an old Ouija board. She looked at the other 11 confused jurors and asked if the room was spiritually conducive. She seriously proposed contacting the murder victim directly to ask who actually committed the crime. The foreman looked at her with pure terror while others moved their chairs away from her. The judge had to intervene because ghost testimony is not admissible in a court of law. She was removed for trying to summon the dead to solve a case. 22. A desperate man decided that a felony was better than sitting in a boring courtroom all day long. He slipped out to a payphone and called in a fake bomb threat to the courthouse building. He thought this would cancel jury duty for everyone and let him go home early. The police traced the call instantly because he was not as clever as he thought he was. Instead of watching TV on his couch, he was arrested by a SWAT team immediately. He traded a simple day of civic duty for a serious prison sentence. The judge was absolutely furious at the massive waste of police resources. 23. A tech-savvy guy decided that he knew more than the lawyers who went to school for years. During the opening statements, he pulled out his phone and started typing furiously under the table. He suddenly interrupted the prosecutor to announce that he had just Googled the law himself. He confidently told the stunned attorney that his legal argument was completely wrong according to the internet. The judge slammed his gavel down and looked at the man with intense anger. Researching the case outside of court is strictly forbidden and grounds for a mistrial. He was escorted out immediately for thinking a search engine replaced a law degree. 24. A dedicated sci-fi fan tried to use a fictional language to confuse the entire legal system. When the judge asked him basic questions, he refused to speak a single word of English. He only answered in aggressive Klingon while staring intensely at the bewildered court reporter. He thought this would force them to dismiss him because nobody could understand him. However, the judge found a bailiff who was also a huge nerd and could translate perfectly. The man's face turned bright red when his plan backfired completely in front of everyone. He was forced to speak English or face contempt charges for his galactic performance. 25. An elderly man stood up with a look of genuine fear in his trembling eyes. He pleaded with the judge to excuse him from the high-profile murder trial immediately. He explained that his wife was the nosiest person in the entire neighborhood. He told the court that if he could not tell her the secrets of the case, she would literally kill him. The whole courtroom laughed, but the man remained deadly serious about his domestic safety. The judge looked at the poor guy and realized he was actually terrified of his spouse. He was excused to save his marriage and possibly his life from his curious wife. 26. A grumpy old hermit tried to use his bad personality as a get-out-of-jail-free card. He crossed his arms and told the judge that he simply did not like people at all. He claimed he did not play well with others and would be a nightmare in the jury room. The judge smiled a wicked smile and decided to teach the man a lesson. He told the man that jury duty would be the perfect opportunity to socialize him. The man looked horrified as he was forced to sit with 11 strangers. His plan to be antisocial backfired in the most poetic way possible. 27. A political activist decided to sabotage the trial before it even began by educating everyone. He arrived with a backpack full of pamphlets about the concept of jury nullification. He started handing them out to every potential juror in the waiting area like a salesman. He explained that they had the right to ignore the law if they disagreed with it. The prosecutor saw this and nearly had a panic attack right there in the hallway. The judge had to dismiss the entire panel of jurors because they had all been compromised. One man single-handedly wasted thousands of tax dollars with a few pieces of paper. 28. A man walked into the solemn courtroom carrying a large colorful suitcase that looked very suspicious. When he sat down, he opened it and pulled out a creepy wooden ventriloquist dummy. He introduced the puppet as Mr. Chuckles to the horrified woman sitting next to him. He told the judge that he could not vote on the verdict without consulting his wooden partner first. The judge stared at him in disbelief while the puppet appeared to look back. Security was called immediately to remove the man and his wooden friend. It was easily the most terrifying comedy act the courthouse had ever witnessed during a trial. 29. A young woman who clearly thought very highly of herself tried a very vain excuse. She stood up and flipped her hair while addressing the exhausted judge on the bench. She argued that she was simply too beautiful to look at gruesome crime scene photos. She claimed that seeing ugly things would ruin her vibe and negative energy affects her beauty. The entire jury pool rolled their eyes at her incredible narcissism and lack of empathy. The judge was not impressed by her self-proclaimed gorgeousness or her fragile vibe. She was dismissed not because she was pretty, but because she was incredibly annoying to everyone. 30. A goth teenager dressed entirely in black velvet tried to use supernatural rules to escape. He stood at the entrance of the courtroom and refused to cross the threshold. He loudly proclaimed that, like a vampire, he could not enter unless formally invited by the owner. He insisted that entering without an invitation would violate his dark spiritual laws. The judge looked at the bailiff and simply told him to drag the kid inside. The boy realized that modern laws do not care about vampire folklore or dramatic entrances. He sat down sulking while the rest of the room tried to understand what just happened. 31. A very confused man tried the ultimate excuse by claiming he was literally dead. He spent hours forging an official-looking death certificate to prove his own demise to the court. However, he made the most foolish mistake possible during the execution of his plan. He actually walked into the courthouse personally to hand the death certificate to the clerk. The clerk stared at the living, breathing man standing right in front of her counter. She asked him how a dead man drove himself to the courthouse that morning. He realized his stupidity immediately, while security guards laughed at his zombie status. The judge was not amused by the sudden resurrection. 32. A confident businessman stood up and adjusted his tie while addressing the judge. He claimed he was absolutely indispensable at his high-profile job and could not serve. He insisted that his entire company would collapse if he missed even one single day. The judge decided to verify this claim by calling the man's boss on speakerphone immediately. The entire courtroom listened as the boss laughed and said they did not really need him. He said the employee was actually very easily replaceable and could stay there all week. The man sat down in total humiliation while the jurors giggled at his inflated ego. 33. A prestigious university philosophy student tried to use metaphysics to get out of bed early. He arrived late and began arguing with the strict judge about the nature of reality. He claimed that time is just a social construct and therefore he could not be late. He insisted that the concept of 9 o'clock did not actually exist in the universe. The judge looked at him like he was an alien from another dimension. He told the student that jail time is definitely a real construct he would experience soon. The student realized that philosophy class arguments do not work in the real legal system. 34. A grown man who appeared to be at least 40 years old approached the bench. He did not bring a medical form or a letter from his employer for excusal. Instead, he handed the judge a handwritten note on flowery stationery from his mother. The note explained that her precious son was far too sensitive for a harsh courtroom environment. She claimed his feelings would be hurt by the mean lawyers and sad stories. The judge read the note aloud, while the man stood there looking at his shoes. The entire courtroom erupted in laughter at the mama's boy. He was sent home to his mother immediately. 35. A man decided to act like a broken robot to sabotage the selection process. The prosecutor asked him for his full name and he loudly shouted the word guilty. The confused lawyer then asked for his age, and he yelled guilty again with conviction. Every single question about his address or occupation was met with the same aggressive answer. The judge realized the man was trying to force a mistrial by showing extreme bias. It was a bizarre performance that made everyone in the room feel incredibly awkward. He was eventually removed for being unable to communicate like a normal human being. 36. A woman decided to exploit a global health panic to avoid her civic duties. She waited for a quiet moment and started coughing loudly into her handkerchief. She announced to the worried room that she had just returned from a trip to West Africa. Everyone recoiled in fear, thinking she brought a deadly virus into the building. The judge ordered a quick background check on her passport history right there. It turned out she had never left the state of Ohio in her entire life. She was exposed as a liar in front of everyone, and the fear turned into pure anger instantly. 37. A young woman thought she had invented the perfect way to sleep during the trial. She wore a large pair of sunglasses inside the dimly lit courtroom. She had creatively painted wide-open eyes on the lenses to make it look like she was paying attention. She sat perfectly still for 45 minutes while the lawyers droned on. The bailiff eventually noticed that she had not blinked a single time in almost an hour. He walked over and tapped her shoulder, causing her to wake up with a jump. The judge confiscated her glasses and scolded her for the cartoonish attempt at napping. 38. An elderly man shuffled into the courtroom pretending he could not hear a single thing. He cupped his ear and shouted what at the judge repeatedly to prove his deafness. He wanted everyone to believe he was unfit to listen to the evidence presented. The clever judge decided to test the man's disability with a simple trick. He waited a moment and then whispered very softly that the man was free to go. The man immediately stood up and grabbed his coat to leave the room. The judge smiled and ordered him to sit back down because his hearing was clearly perfect. 39. A man walked into the courtroom and immediately pointed a shaking finger at the wall. There was a standard map of the world hanging behind the judge's bench. The man claimed he could not serve because the globe map offended his religious cosmology. He insisted that the Earth was actually flat and the map was a lie. The judge stared at the map and then back at the serious conspiracy theorist. It was one of the most ridiculous reasons for bias ever heard in that building. He was dismissed because arguing about the shape of the planet would distract the other jurors. 40. A young man stood up to give a passionate speech about why he could not serve. He started explaining that he was a busy professional with too many important responsibilities. As he gestured wildly with his hands, a plastic bag fell out of his jacket pocket. It landed on the floor with a thud right in front of the sheriff deputy. Everyone stared at the clear bag filled with illegal marijuana sitting on the carpet. The man stopped talking mid-sentence and looked down in total horror. He was not excused from jury duty, but was immediately arrested for possession of drugs. 41. A man decided that the best way to avoid answering questions was to say nothing at all. He walked into the courtroom and pretended he had taken a strict religious vow of silence. He gestured wildly with his hands like a street mime whenever the attorneys asked him anything. The judge watched this silent performance with growing impatience and finally leaned over the bench. He sternly whispered that he would throw the man in jail for contempt of court immediately. The man panicked and instantly shouted that he was actually available to serve on the jury. His sacred vow lasted exactly 5 minutes before the threat of prison broke his character. 42. A confident man thought he could charm his way out of legal responsibility with a bold romantic move. He scribbled a note on a piece of paper and secretly passed it to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to the judge thinking it was a serious medical emergency or conflict. The judge opened the note and realized the man was asking for her personal phone number. She read the note aloud to the entire courtroom while the man smiled awkwardly at her. She told him that hitting on a federal judge is not a valid legal excuse. He was not excused, but he was definitely embarrassed in front of everyone. 43. A woman stood up and made an announcement that terrified both the defense and the prosecution. She pulled out a large notebook and told the judge she was writing a true crime book. She claimed she needed to be on the jury specifically to get good material for her novel. She promised to take detailed notes on every single piece of evidence for her future bestseller. The lawyers realized that having an aspiring author in the jury room was a legal nightmare. She was dismissed immediately because jurors are supposed to judge facts, not write entertainment. She walked out looking disappointed that her literary career had hit a major roadblock. 44. A bored juror decided to express his frustration in the most dangerous way possible. He wrote a frantic note to the court clerk claiming he was being held against his will. Technically, jury duty is mandatory, but he made it sound like a literal kidnapping situation. The clerk read the terrifying note and immediately alerted the armed security guards in the building. The entire courthouse went into a massive emergency lockdown because of his dramatic choice of words. He tried to explain it was a joke about civic duty, but nobody was laughing. He faced serious trouble for causing a panic just because he was bored. 45. A young man thought he could force the court to kick him out by wearing offensive clothing. He arrived wearing a t-shirt with a very graphic and insulting slogan about police officers. He stood there smirking, thinking the judge would send him home for being too biased. The judge looked at the shirt and simply refused to give the man what he wanted. He ordered the man to go to the bathroom and turn the shirt inside out immediately. The man had to sit through the entire selection process wearing his shirt backwards. His plan to look rebellious failed completely, and he just looked ridiculous instead. 46. A man walked in and started acting like he was in the middle of a medical crisis. He told the judge that he had a severe allergy to the specific cleaning solution used in government buildings. He claimed that just being in the courthouse was making his throat close up. The judge noticed that the man only started fake sneezing whenever the court staff looked at him. The rest of the time, he was scrolling on his phone looking perfectly healthy. The judge called him out on his miraculous selective allergies in front of everyone. He stopped sneezing instantly once he realized nobody believed his medical lie. 47. A corrupt politician came up with a truly diabolical plan to win his local election. He was running for mayor and wanted to stop his opponent's supporters from voting. He sent out hundreds of fake jury summonses to people likely to vote for the other guy. He hoped they would be stuck in court all day instead of casting their ballots. The plan fell apart when confused voters showed up to a courthouse that had no record of them. The authorities traced the fake documents back to his campaign office immediately. He went from running for mayor to running from the police very quickly. 48. A man stood before the judge and tried to use a classic soap opera plot twist. He held up his summons and claimed that the court had made a huge mistake. He insisted that the paper was actually meant for his twin brother and not him. He spoke with such conviction that the clerk actually started checking the records for a sibling. It turned out that the man was an only child and had no brother at all. He had invented an imaginary twin just to get out of a traffic court case. The judge was not amused by his creative storytelling and he had to serve. 49. A A couple in Boston treated their beloved pet cat like a real member of the family. They listed their cat named Sal on the official census form as a resident of the house. The government computer system automatically selected Sal for jury duty service a few months later. The owners tried to explain that Sal was a feline, but the court bureaucracy was stubborn. They actually had to take the cat to a vet to get a DNA test confirmation. The judge finally excused Sal when it was proven he could not speak English or understand laws. It was the furriest case of mistaken identity in history. So there you have it, proof that some people will literally fake their own death, summon ghosts, or pretend to be a time traveler just to avoid sitting in a chair for $20 a day. The sheer level of entitlement is honestly inspiring, even if it is borderline illegal. If you enjoyed watching these legal disasters unfold, do your civic duty and smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe to BrainFumble and turn on notifications, or I'll assume you're trying to avoid me like a jury summons. Now tell me in the comments, what is the absolute craziest excuse you would use to get out of court? I bet you can't beat the rotisserie chicken lady. Thanks for watching.